I'm a fan of the Stalker franchise, been one pretty much ever since I first touched Shadow of Chernobyl at age 12 while I was visiting my friend's house. I will never forget going below the Agroprom Research Institute for one of the early story missions, entering a long corridor with an unfamiliar shape at the end of it and nearly full force going number 2 right into my pants when I saw that zoom in attack animation for the first time. Back then I was too preoccupied with the aforementioned emptying of my bowels to understand, but I just encountered something truly special. The kind of game that comes along once in a decade, an experience that cannot be replicated by any other piece of media. Not flawless by any stretch of the imagination, of course. You would need to be a complete fool to expect perfection from anything, and you would also need to completely lack imagination. Perfection is the depth of expression rooted in the flaws that make our entertainment. I obviously think fondly of the Stalker trilogy, so when Stalker 2 was announced, I was super thrilled. I mean, sure, the first trailer didn't really show off any gameplay, but the release date was set in stone. In a year, 2012 to be precise, we would go back to the zone to scavenge and hunt mutants. Well, that one didn't quite pan out the way we thought it would. So then in 2018, Stalker 2 was announced for the second time, and I was skeptical. I honestly was skeptical until the day the game was released, right up to November 20th. I mean, between 2018 and 2024, it was just fucking disaster after disaster on a global scale, and then locally for the devs in Ukraine. But it finally arrived. Through all that hardship, I could not believe I would get to venture out into the zone again, but here we are. Finally, I have come home after all this time. The game had a rocky launch for some very obvious reasons, but I would like to leave that discussion for last because technical problems like spaghetti code or bugs can be squashed and straightened out. It's not the 2000s anymore, for better or for worse. Whether this is an acceptable state for the game to launch? Well, it's fucking not, obviously. But regardless, I'm not interested in the things that can be fixed later. I'm a pretty patient guy, but there are things underneath the bugs and technical problems that could never be fixed if the devs fuck them up. I mean, no patch can fix how dull Starfield is, or how cringe Forspoken was, so let's focus on the true core of the experience for now is all I'm saying. So Stalker 2, you know there's this saying, they don't make them like they used to, right? And if you really think about it, is that a bad thing? What if they found a better way to do it? Right? Well, let me tell you, Stalker 2 is one of those they don't make them like that anymore. Because holy fuck, this would kill an average game developer of today. Like, if someone got transferred from working on Final Fantasy VII Rebirth out in the east, or Dragon Age Veilguard in the west, to working on Stalker 2, they would not survive the dev cycle, man. This is a game that could only come out of Eastern Europe. Why? The first thing is the most shocking. The devs actually fucking stuck to the original recipe for how it's brewed. Stalker 2 is a sequel to Stalker 1, 2 and 3. Yeah, it's a bit of a situation. But what do you actually do in Stalker 2? Much like in the previous games, you venture into the zone of alienation, an area that used to be roughly 60 kilometers of land around the Chernobyl national power plant. Used to be because the zone is growing. It's a complicated matter. Inside the zone there are mutants of all kinds, factions of different motives, and more importantly for you, shiny rocks that are worth a lot to the wealthy people on the outside. So get in there and scour some anomalies in search for treasure. Just watch out for the bandits who would rather scour your pockets. So all things considered, Stalker 2 is a proud sequel to the original trilogy. It doesn't chicken shit away from the core of its identity like some other Ukrainian games I know. Metro Exodus. For the most part, it builds upon the legacy of each Stalker game that came before. Obviously, it's not all there, sadly, but I was kinda shocked that the devs didn't modernize the game by introducing fucking skill trees and fast travel to every point of interest you discover, and AI companions that wouldn't shut the fuck up. Hey Skiff, I think you can climb to the stash through here. You know, things like that. No man, they only modernized what you would expect. The gunplay, the graphics, introduced some actual cutscenes with actual acting and whatnot. They even have a functional tutorial for the first time in Stalker franchise history. This might disqualify the game from being a Stalker game in the eyes of hardcore fans. Combat encounters play out very similar to the original games, except there are a whole fucking lot more enemies, bandits, mutants, friendlies and whatever else coming out of the woodwork to add to the encounter. In this case, I would say bigger is not necessarily better. I've gotta give it to Stalker 1. I prefer more intimate encounters with smaller groups over being the zone's doom guy in 2. But the gunplay variety of guns and the new stealth takedowns, despite stealth being quite wonky, it works damn well. I was never mad when an excuse to unload the clip came around, except for some of the mutants like the Fleshes and Bloodsuckers, who were unbelievably fucking tanky on release. And they drop no items in this one, being a net negative on your resources. Now the ridiculous values of enemy HP have been addressed by a recent patch that came through after I was done with the game, so they shouldn't waste nearly as many resources as they used to. When it comes to humanoid combat, the only thing I really hate is that faction members are hard to tell in Stalker 2. In the original trilogy, when you looted a body you got a brief rundown on who your assailant or victim was. In 2 you have to rely on recognizing their colors or symbols in the middle of a firefight out in the swamps. Yeah. The game is lengthy and big when compared to the trilogy, and the devs use both of these aspects in the best way possible. The longer runtime of the main story expands on the zone, its happenings and the new factions that came about. It builds upon the world as a whole, and that's great. The size of the game, other than the fucking 140 gigabytes of free space required, is amazing. The map is just humongous, with many places of interest, diverse vistas, and just whole ass areas from previous games lovingly remade in the sequel, without loading screens and mostly without the artificial boundaries that the original Stalker created to keep you in each area. It truly feels like a Stalker game at heart, upgraded with everything you would expect from today's technology and standards. Between the many locations and nests, there are tons of callbacks to the original games. There's so much love and attention to detail towards the originals from the devs of 2. As a fan of the franchise, it feels like they completely understood what the fans were looking forward to and they went above and beyond to deliver. Going around the zone, doing quests, diving into anomalies, checking nests for loot, and pillaging stashes of other stalkers, it's some of the best vibes you will feel in modern gaming. This is not new to anybody who played the originals probably. Trust me, hardcore fans, you will feel right at home. But if you never played Stalker, now you have to. The vibes and the immersion are just without comparison. It truly is an otherworldly magical experience, even if you gotta change your pants from time to time. Trust me, it's worth it. The classic factions are still there, with some evolving into others or splitting apart. The reputation system is also still there, but sadly you can't really join any of the major factions. It feels like a wasted opportunity, but what can you do? Speaking up on this, I have to air my fucking grievance. For a game that throws so many choices your way doing the story missions, none of them fucking matter and it pisses me off. The previous games did this too. Clear Sky had 2 endings that were dictated by how well you did in the pseudo boss fight at the end. Nothing you do in the game previous to this point changes anything in the ending. Shadow of Chernobyl had a ton of bad endings depending on your state at the end of the game, which was insanely cool, but they are the bad endings so no one really cares. The 2 good endings you literally choose in a dialogue tree and that's it. Again, nothing you do up to that point changes anything about these 2 good endings. Now there's an important distinction between Shadow of Chernobyl and Clear Sky. To even get access to the 2 good endings, you have to follow a very specific side quest line to uncover the secrets of the zone, so there's a bit of an impact on how you played the game on the ending, but not that much. Call of Pripyat, the last game in the original trilogy, did the best possible thing you could do in a game like this. It has a slideshow with 20 possible slides, many of which have 2 or 3 different versions. The outcomes of struggles of the zone's factions and their inhabitants change based on your choices and how much time you spend helping those people via side quests. Sort of like the Fallout series has done for decades. I think that is the best way to go about rewarding the player for spending the time with your game, acknowledging where the players went and where they made a difference. So then Stalker 2 has so many of these choices in its main quest that feel so important in the moment, and there are tons of ways to resolve certain quests with different outcomes, and none of it matters in the end. There are 4 endings, and all of them are based solely on the dialogue options you picked in the very final mission of this more than 30-hour game. That really sucks. I would have loved it if the choices you made during the story decided who you ally with and what ending you get, with an additional, simple, clean slideshow for the side quests and side characters. As it is, you can just fucking save at the beginning of the last mission and can see all of it yourself within a couple hours, which takes away from the endings greatly in my opinion. The modernization of the difficulty system is the only one I despise with a passion. The older Stalker games had stupid simple difficulty. The highest was the baseline of your damage and physical resistance. Each difficulty below the highest would increase your resistance and your damage. It also affected how much loot you would find on bodies and in containers, with the lowest difficulty having the most loot and the highest having the least loot. That's it. There's a myth propagated by the community and some reviewers that enemies had more health the lower you went on difficulty. That's not true at all. So now in Stalker 2 it's the same. The difficulty affects how plentiful the loot is and how many shots you can tank. Except they also decided to adjust enemy health, which is a modern fucking trend I despise with passion. Now on Veteran, everyone and everything is just stupidly tanky. Some important notes are: I played before the balance patch that lowered the health of many of the mutants. And second, body shots in this game do crazy low damage compared to headshots. This is normal for a shooter, but it's unbelievable just how bad the number gap seems to be. Some enemies will drop dead after 2 headshots and then tank up to 20 or 30 bullets to the body, which just feels fucking terrible. All of the problems with the bullet sponge enemies and Veteran affecting how much loot you gather made the game miserable for me personally, because it forced you to backtrack to nearest town way more often to restock and fix your gear. It's a subtle change, but how Stalker 2 approaches difficulty compared to the previous games just sucks. I started out on Veteran, but all of this together with the awful technical state of the game at launch made me drop the difficulty after 15 or so hours. Mind you, I was swimming in coupons and ammo. I just found it incredibly tedious to go back to base so often. Also, a thing of note, I played the game in English because it defaulted to English, and I had an inkling in the back of my mind that something was amiss for like 10 hours. And then I realized English just doesn't fit the setting at all. But by that point, I kinda got used to how all the characters sound in the English dub. It's probably a good idea to play with the Ukrainian dub on, but English works if you are really desperate to understand what's spoken in-game. It's just, Skiff sounds like goddamn Jesse Pinkman, and it keeps distracting me so fucking much.
Just a lot of trash. Food waste, human waste, you name it. bitch!
Visually, it's pretty good. There's a ton of opportunity to compare how far we have gone in 17 years since you revisit a lot of locations from the original trilogy. There are some direct comparisons available on YouTube. Let me open up by saying, holy hell, the original games really hold up. Stalker 2 obviously looks better. The character models, the fidelity, everything basically. And I mean, after almost 2 decades, it better fucking look better. But is it visually more interesting? A lot of what contributes to 2's look is just random shit on the ground. This is not even a slight at Stalker 2, this is a slight at modern gaming as a whole. What purpose does any of that visual clutter serve? It gets so bad at points in Stalker 2 because sometimes you will start getting domed from behind by a bandit that just spawned. You turn around and it's just literally a goddamn fucking bush shooting at you as if you were playing Fortnite. Like, sure, all the bushes and barrels and crates make the world more visually populated, but I don't know if that's what Stalker 2 needed, especially given its performance issues at launch. A few people also voiced their dislike for the new color palette. The original is a lot more drab, washed out, cold and unwelcoming, and I think it's a bit more fitting. In 2, I sometimes catch myself thinking, wow, what a nice sunset, as if I'm playing Red Dead 2, and then I remember I'm in the virtual representation of one of the worst places you could ever end up in. Probably the biggest upgrade visuals wise are the anomalies. They look very cool thanks to modern computer capabilities. Now let's get into the problems I mentioned at the beginning, things that are wrong with the game that will probably get fixed. Starting with the A-Life. A-Life is an awesome fucking system from the original Stalker games. The map you were on was in constant simulation of what is happening in the open world. Groups of roaming members of different factions, bandits and mutants would wander around and engage each other. Sometimes a mutant you were tasked with killing encountered an NPC and they killed him for you. Sometimes you would encounter the aftermath of 2 factions engaging with each other. This system made Zone feel like a place full of life that goes on with or without you. There's none of that in Stalker 2. Everything beyond 100 meters away from you functionally doesn't exist. Mutants and roaming groups only start spawning when you are hanging around places of interest out in the open world, and it's not even fucking funny how aggressive this system is. You will not encounter anything or anyone for 20 minutes, enter a point of interest, and every fucking time you turn around, a new group of mutants or NPCs spawns right behind you. It's extremely bad for the immersion and the gameplay. It turns the memorable battles between forces of the Zone from the original trilogy into what's essentially a fucking JRPG random encounter. The devs have said that this is a result of a bug, supposedly, and that they will roll out fixes for this in the future. Here's hoping. Now, the discussion over the game, maybe rightfully so, it's not for me to judge, gets massively overtaken by people complaining about the game's technical state. It was bad. It was really fucking bad. The requirements of the game would have me believe I could run this on medium settings with no issues, but I would still drop into single-digit frames on low settings from time to time. I'm not gonna take a long time harping on this, because now, as of November 30th, there have been 2 massive patches that addressed a lot of the problems with the bugs and optimization. It shouldn't have launched like this, but whatever, it's water under the bridge as far as I'm concerned. This is gonna sound very negative, but stick with me. Overall, it's probably the worst Stalker game in the franchise, but it still sweeps the competition on the AAA market today. I will gladly give this game an 8 out of 10, despite all the issues I faced. It's definitely worth your attention, and I definitely think the game will just keep getting better with every patch, so I will revisit this in a couple of months with an updated review. I think it's a miracle how the devs could finalize it despite everything that happened during development. And that's it for my review of Stalker 2. Feel free to check out the rest of my channel. If you liked the review, please consider subscribing and liking the video, leaving a comment. And yeah, I will see you guys in the next one.